And it kind of became quiet and I'm going to say, quote, boring. Meanwhile, just sending me mailbox money for $1,500 a month. And I was like, after like 3 months of this, I'm like, I wonder what's going on with the apartment building over there. But it keeps sending me money. And wait a minute, if I'm not buying and fixing and selling houses on the flips, I'm not making money. Wait a minute, something is not right here, right? The house flips is not passive. But through the recession, those restaurants, the sales just went down and never really recovered to the point where I could no longer afford my guy running my 6 restaurants at the time. I had to let him go. Now I'm running 6 restaurants. They're all an hour away from me, one way. And so I tried to put my heart into it, couldn't do it. It was like trying to catch a falling knife. And I realized finally I had to sell these restaurants. And just to give you an idea, these restaurants cost like $300,000 to open new, right? And I sold them for $30,000 cash, fast close. And it took a lot longer than I thought, and it was extremely stressful. I'm like, these restaurants are losing money. I ran out of cash, almost lost my house. Now, while this is going on, I remembered my house flips, like, man, I need to do something for money. So I started flipping houses. And I didn't, all my money, it wasn't quite lost at the point yet. I still had my restaurants, but it was deployed. Remember, I went all in. I'm like, man, I'm going in. This is it. This is my permanent financial freedom. And I went all in. All right, hindsight, my gosh, I wish I would have got started in apartments back in 2009. Holy smokes. No, but instead, Michael got into restaurants. C'est la vie. One lesson there is I did not have a restaurant mentor who probably talked me out of getting into that particular franchise and also probably would have advised me to grow a lot slower than I was. I was very eager to parlay my money into passive income and led to a variety of bad decisions. But again, I do remember the house flipping and I was like, man, I need to get myself some money, and house flipping worked pretty good. So why don't I go back and doing that? Now, I didn't have any money to invest. So I was like, well, why don't I see if someone wants to invest with me, right? So it was surprisingly easy to get friends and family to invest with me because it was a 6-month note, promissory note. It had 12% interest and $25,000 minimum. So people would invest with me. I'd maybe get 4 investors. We'd buy a house, fix it up, and then sell it 6 months later. And then they get their money back. They're like, this is pretty cool. And they invested again, told all their friends. So at one point I had like $1 million deployed. We flipped like 3 dozen houses over 3 years. It was pretty cool. So while this is going on, towards the end of this cycle, I got into my first apartment building. It was a 12 unit in Washington, D.C. Kind of got into it because I remembered my commercial real estate class I took in 2006 or so, dusted it off. And I got this deal from a wholesaler, 12 unit apartment building. It was listed on the MLS. And I was like, wow, let me take a look at this thing. I dusted off my stuff. That's when I started I developed my syndicated deal analyzer back in 2006 because actually I was calling on brokers in Texas at the time for about 9 months until I got too busy with the restaurants. I stopped doing that. But I developed a spreadsheet that is now known as syndicated deal analyzer. So when this 12 unit came along, I dusted the thing off, put the numbers in. I was like, man, this could work, right? And it was kind of an afterthought because I was still in the middle of flipping houses. And I got 5 investors to put up $50,000 each for this deal. I think I bought it for like $480,000. I had to put $100,000 work into it and got into this thing. It was in Washington, D.C., and it was a complete and utter nightmare. Okay, let me tell you how bad of a deal this was for me because it was a Section 8 housing, and it was, I had a professional tenant in there. You know what that is, a professional tenant? Someone who knows the system very well. In Washington, D.C., the good old district is very pro-tenant, makes it very easy to file complaints or call inspectors or even file lawsuits. They make it very easy, and this is exactly what he was doing. I didn't realize he was doing this with his previous owner, hadn't paid rent in 3 years. Okay, so now he was my problem, and he was a really big problem. I couldn't really deal with it, neither could my property manager, until I realized I had the wrong property manager, and I replaced him with someone who's familiar with Section 8 housing. Then within 3 months, the problem went away. In the meantime, though, I was dealing with lawsuits and fines and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I had inspectors crawling all over the building. Of course, he wasn't paying any rent at this time. And I literally almost ran out of money. Like, I don't know, another 3 months would have been devastating. I would have had no more money in this deal. And so again, lesson learned here. I didn't have a mentor again. Dash darn it. Didn't have a mentor because that mentor would have basically told me not to invest in pro-tenant areas like Washington, D.C. And then he also would have told me to get a property manager that is appropriate to whatever the property is. So Section 8 is a specialty housing, student housing is specialty, things of that nature. You have to get the right property manager for this stuff. Well, I didn't know this stuff. I'm a smart guy. I can figure this stuff out. All right, so what if I get punched in the face on the way through? All right. But what happened is then with this thing finally went from completely exhausting, stressful, while I'm trying to get out of the restaurants and I'm flipping houses. So I'm working like 70 hours a week during this time. And it kind of became quiet and I'm going to say, quote, boring. Meanwhile, just sending me mailbox money for $1,500 a month. And I was like, after like 3 months of this, I'm like, I wonder what's going on with the apartment building over there. But it keeps sending me money. And wait a minute, if I'm not buying and fixing and selling houses on the flips, I'm not making money. Wait a minute, something is not right here, right? The house flips is not passive. There's no residual income. It's not really what Robert Kiyosaki talked about in his book. And I was like, my goodness, maybe I should stop flipping houses and start buying more apartment buildings. And that's kind of when this light bulb went off. And that's kind of when I shifted. And so I shifted in essentially 2014 is when I kind of made it a thing. And that's kind of when I started blogging about it because now I'm a local expert, right? In the DC area. Oh, there's this guy, Michael, bought an apartment building and he raised it with an investor. It's called what is it called again? It's called a syndication. Sounds illegal, but sounds fascinating, right? And so I was giving like these lunchtime, taught a seminar one day with the owner of our RIA meeting, the same mentor who mentored me at wholesale and bought this RIA, okay? A shout out for Tom Zeeb, been up in DC. And he had me like teach this class and I actually had like, 24 people show up. They paid like $200 to spend the day with me and I just do all the stuff I did and I sold half of them to like a $200 where they got all my documents and templates and of course the analyzer and the day. I was like, this is so fascinating. Why would these people spend their Saturday and spend like $300 on learning this thing? And it was fascinating to me. And that's when I realized that was the way forward. It was the single best way to actually become financially free. All I had to do was scale that thing. And I realized that 12 unit now, I'll never do a 12 unit again. I would have done a 25 unit, right? That the next deal, I only needed maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 of these properties and I would be done. Versus if I built a portfolio of single family houses, and let's say I wanted $10,000 a month in income, and each house would present, maybe create $200 worth of cash flow per month, I would need 50 houses. And I just spent 3 years flipping 3 dozen houses. I'm like, man, that doesn't appeal to me at all. Well, luckily I didn't do that. But who knows? Maybe I'll talk you out of doing that as well. So this is really when the light bulb moment went off for me that this whole thing about single family house investing, if you really, really think about it, is kind of fundamentally broken. I mean, it really can't lead you to permanent financial freedom, right? Because if you're not selling, you're transaction based. Flipping is a little better because you generate a little bit more money, but it's also transaction based. So that's not passive. Now I can do the Burr method, which is pretty cool. Burr method, a lot stronger because I'm actually trying to build value add deal and I'm recycling the money. I'm using the lender or the hard money lender I'm using, and I actually kind of repeat it, right? So it's not just landlording, buying a cash and hold property, it's actually improving something. And that's pretty cool. And you can get a little bit of cash flow from that and then you get chunks. So I like that again, but again, if I'm looking at $7,000 or $10,000 a month in income, how many of these burrs do I need to do? And at what point can I become full-time and live off of that? So it is more powerful than flipping for sure, but it's still not going to get me to permanent financial freedom. And it's not the kind of tool that I can use necessarily to build generational wealth. It's a lot of work also, these burrs. I mean, they're a little bit like flips, but you're not selling them right away. And so the idea of apartment buildings really is the number one way to build financial freedom. The problem with that, of course, is when you're listening to this right now, you're like, yeah, Michael, that's great. I've heard that before, but I don't have the experience and I don't have the money. And I felt the same way exactly because this deal that I got was off the MLS from obviously a single family house broker. And when I did this deal, I felt pretty good about myself. Okay, then I was actually calling on, I was like, Mom, maybe I'll turn this into a thing. And what I found was I didn't feel like I could do it again. I kind of found like I got lucky. This wasn't really a strategy for me because I didn't get this from talking to brokers. I didn't get this from actually working some kind of system. I just didn't think I could do it again. And so I didn't have the experience. And when I actually started talking to brokers, they weren't very impressed. My house flipping journey. This was back in 2006 when I was calling on these Texas brokers. When I called them, this was actually, I had flipped maybe a couple houses at that time. And they asked me about my multifamily tracker and I didn't have any. So it was bizarre. Like my house flipping background, the little I had, didn't do me any good at all. So I didn't feel like I'd had the experience and I didn't really have the money. And it was really hard, by the way, to get those 5 investors. There was only one of those 5 investors actually invested in the single family houses and all the 4 ones were new. And it took a lot of work to get that done. So I just really did not feel I could do it. I didn't have the cash to really scale this up. And you may be feeling the same way. Now, I kind of figured this out over the years, but right now, just in working with so many people since 2014, since we've been teaching people how to do that stuff, we now know that you don't actually need single family house investing experience at all.